The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning or good afternoon if you're not on the West Coast, and welcome. This is Nancy.
And this is Steve.
This is the third in our series of data integrity webinars. The first two covered turbidity and disinfection. If you missed either one, they're posted on the ASDWA website. Today, we want to focus on implementation of data integrity from a state perspective. Why do it, how to get support, and what to do with the findings.
So some of you are probably already wondering, well, where the heck is the box? So we have black box, then we open Pandora's box. And purposely there is no box because we're going to try to get out of the box. And as Nancy mentioned, we're going to cover and explore the how, why, what, and where of pursuing excellence or implementing better data integrity, not just as a fad, but trying to get a systematic change. And we always have trouble with our first slide. Each presentation. There we go. And the driver behind all of this is our shared mission of ensuring and supplying great drinking water.
So here's a quick overview of our turbidity data verification project. 25 rapid rate filtration plants in our Northwest region, that's the pink area. And we chose rapid rate because for that technology, turbidity is the single most important parameter that we use to tell us that the plant is operating effectively. During this project, we had a huge range in system size, everything from an 18-gallon-a-minute package plant to a 132 MGD municipal filtration facility. And we used a learn-as-you-go adaptive approach because honestly, we did not know a lot when we started. So here are some of the issues that we observed during that project. So we found, accuracy is affected by a surprising number of things. Instrument setting is number one, and those can affect what gets reported to SCADA. Sampling locations can be not representative, like for example, turbidity collected from after the high service pumps and after the clear well. We found electronic data manipulation, operational practices such as not following the manufacturer's recommended maintenance, and human actions such as ignoring data that didn't seem like it could be real. The bottom line is that we found issues that could impact data accuracy and precision at every plant, even well-operated plants.
And for you that missed the disinfection data integrity project, a quick summary. Within that same area on the map that Nancy mentioned, I would have said lavender, we followed up on turbidity data with the disinfection data, and we looked at all the remaining surface water treatment plants in that region in, I guess, in our hope to remove any bias from different types of treatment. Look at lots of different technologies, even some unfiltered supplies, membranes, bags, slow sand filters, and we looked at alternative disinfectants, including UV and ozone. We focused our findings, though, we reported out on primary disinfection, which was mostly free chlorine for all these systems. And again, huge range in size, super tiny, a gallon a minute to 180 MGD. You're going to hear us probably come back to this. This learn-as-you-go adaptive approach didn't have all the answers when we started. And in this case, on this project, we took portable field testing equipment with us. So we measured chlorine residual pH and temperature. And quite a number of issues observed. Once again, every single facility, the best facility only had 2 issues, and the rest had a lot more. Here's some of the numbers. The average across all 33 plants was 8 issues in each treatment plant. And for you that missed the grand challenge, it kind of sums up here in this little box from the quiz, what difference does it make? And in this scenario, we used our data that we measured when we found inaccuracies, and we didn't do this for all 33. Once again, we did an adaptive approach, but when we compared the results using what we thought was more accurate data, and this would then a calculation of the inactivation ratio, this sums up the maximum that we found. And I think you know that I was quite surprised. I think I was think it was going to be the chlorine residual, but it wasn't. It was actually time had the greatest impact on accuracy in the data we found. So that is our summary. And then there were some lessons learned, some harsh lessons at times for us. One of them is if you're going to have an optimization program, you have to have a data integrity program. I think personal learning is always the best, but if you can't personally learn it, then that's a good story. I'm all about stories. An example, we run a treatment optimization program here in Washington State. How many years?
Oh, since 2003.
Since 2003. So it's meeting filtered water turbidity. This is for rapid rate treatment plants, 0.1, 95% of the time. You have to do it. You have to reach that in a year, and you can't have any other significant violations. Like you can't forget to collect a coliform sample or something like that. So I'm a huge believer in this program, and we have different awards. So if you can do that for 3 years in a row, you get a bronze certificate, 5 years silver, on and on. And I think it's a big deal, so we feel pretty obligated to hand deliver this award if possible, instead of send it in the mail. We happen to have a system, a mountain resort, and it's a 3-year award. I ended up being the one. I'm going to go there, so drive up there. Had been doing quite a bit of interface with their management, so they had their vice president of marketing set up this big gig at the foot of a lift, and maybe 25 staff, and I gave them the big thing and how awesome it is, and it is awesome. And then 2 years later, I was back here doing turbidity data integrity investigation. Yeah, so they had some trouble with the scaling in the SCADA, and there might be some question if they really got that award. So that is nothing like a little, I don't know what that is, cold water in the face to really drive home optimization program. You got to have good data.
So the second lesson learned is our drinking water industry can do a better job. So clearly with this group of utilities, we found that to be true. We also found, as we look across the state and have carried this out to other areas, that we found similar findings. But then I have a little personal experience. My daughter was attending college in the Midwest, and I visited a plant in Wisconsin and another one in Michigan while she was a student. And I found there that both plants had their error mode set to hold the last good reading on all of their turbidimeters, and the operators weren't aware that that was an issue. And then one of our colleagues recently toured a plant while he was on vacation in the UK, and he found a turbidimeter that had no sample flow going through it. So we're convinced that this is not just plants in the Northwest region or in Washington. It's actually our entire industry can do a better job.
And the third bullet, we can do a better job. The we here, yes, water industry, but specifically the oversight agencies or public health professionals. We believe that you can get precision and accuracy. It is an obtainable thing.
The last lesson learned is you can tailor this effort to your resources. So we originally learned about this through a workshop that was an all-day workshop, 3 teams spending that day at the plant, but we knew we couldn't do that. So we ended up, paring this down to 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours, and 2 people. And it wasn't perfect. We didn't cover everything, but we were able to succeed and find out what the issues were by scaling it to what the resources that we have. And we did it in our off season, and we fit it around our regular jobs. Initially, it wasn't a special project. So, okay, so we don't know everything about disinfection data integrity or data integrity in general by any means, and we learn new things every day. So one of the things that we noticed is that if you structure this as a research project versus a regulatory activity, then it impacts the attitude of the operator. So it can either be a friendly interchange where actually you're learning from each other, or it can be a negative thing where the operator's on the defensive. And so we kind of made up the second picture, as you can tell. But actually, we feel like operators are more willing to share when they're less worried about getting a violation letter. And what we're trying to get here is a change in mindset. And we want operators to be thinking about not just the topic we're talking about, but every piece of data that they collect every day. We want them to be asking themselves, how do I know that this value is real?
There's actually a whole bunch of lessons. One of the things is if we buy into, hey, there's fertile ground, so to speak, out there, people willing to do better, is how do you get that information to them and how do you transfer information? One positive that we think that's come from this research, if you will, and quotations around that approach is the one-on-one, the on-site training, it really does have some benefits. And it seems like it gets past that you go to a class and look at something on a screen like this. Ouch, should just change everything right now. Kind of undercut my whole argument. Hey, but then you try to go back to a plan and implement can be tough. In this scenario, we're dealing with the operator or the utilities equipment, and it's hands-on, and you're right there in the moment. Questions are resolved, and you can put in or make changes right there. But we realize that's not enough. Not enough because you can't get to everybody, and there is going to be things that you need follow-up with.
Yeah, you know, some things you can change in the moment. If you convince somebody that the error mode should be set to transfer, you can actually change that as you're standing right there, and it's done. But if it requires external resources, you can't do that. And not everybody is motivated enough to just move from a visit like this to making change in their processes.
So we mentioned we try to do the adaptive approach. Well, we've actually never given a talk on this aspect of data integrity, and we've never given it to an audience like you. So we're going to go with a new approach, and we're open to changing on the fly. So storytelling is good. Sometimes, though, a discussion would be better than a webinar, but we have a webinar, and we were trying to think of ways, how can we get some dialogue across our large nation? So these questions are 9 questions. We're going to work our way through those. And we're going to go in this order, and we're going to give you some thoughts, but we would really appreciate if you have comments or questions on these 9 items. Right now, start typing away, and we would try to incorporate that into our discussion as we go forward. And by no means do we think that we know all the questions or that there's only 9. So we're anticipating maybe a whole manner of things out there that people would be looking for some feedback or discussion. So we're going to go through these, but we'd like you to help us.
So be sure if you use the question pane to add in your questions. if you're referring to one of the existing ones, if you could tell us which number you're talking about, or if it's a new question, just say new, and we'll try and get to all the questions that come in. So question number 1, why spend resources on data integrity? And I'm going to give that to you, Steve.
Yeah, okay. I think because we can do better. We that are on this call, we're more than just oversight agencies. We're an advocacy group. I think public health and science is a little bit under assault, the siege. That might be a little too strong. But if we want standing, if we want credibility, then we need to know what we're talking about and the why and the how. We need to be speaking from a position of, accuracy and precision. We know what we're doing, and this stuff we're dealing with is real numbers. Lots of our decisions are based on data, making quite a bit of decisions, and we actually do make decisions based on absence of data. So within that scenario, I think a strong push initially is we're trying to improve the whole industry, but we're trying to essentially establish and maintain credibility.
Okay, for me, it's all about public health protection. And if we don't have an accurate picture of where the drinking water risks lie, we can't carry out our public health mission. And we also want our actions to count. So if we're spending hours and hours every month reviewing water treatment plant operations data, and they're based upon faulty data, then it's a waste of our limited time and as a resource.
So, number 2, how do you convince water utilities to participate? Nancy?
Well, first of all, if you create and sustain relationships with the utilities you regulate, excuse me, they'll be open to participation. Also, if you come at it from that standpoint that we're out here to learn, I think that really helps as well. So we would, when we were going out to a plant, we would say something like, we're going to be up in your county next week. We'd like to visit your plant. We're working on this project. We'd explain what it was and what the goal was. And we would also make it clear that we'd been to other plants, so they weren't being singled out. And we talk about the goal to find common issues, better understand issues. And we tell them how long we expected their time that we would need. So by doing that, nobody turned us down.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize that it strikes me our whole industry as an inquisitive group of people. We had different personalities at play, and I think sometimes you can skip the whole awkward, first date thing. Do you want to do this? Just you can say we're conducting a study, and when are you available next week? You can also kind of slide that in. Mm-hmm. Hey, I mentioned that it's brand new, and we're going to be interactive here, and it's great. So the questions are showing up on the board, and we're trying to read them while we're answering the question before. So we'll see how this works. A couple comments on question number 1 before we get too far away. A reminder from one of our colleagues, spending resources on data integrity improves relationships with the regulated community. Also has seen increased operator confidence.
And another comment was bad data equals no data.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, next question. What do you do if you find something that's really bad? Steve, that's for you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so it's going to happen. I think you just have to call it out. Right there's a couple, I think, a whole spectrum to move from. So one, you change it right there if you can. Can invoke the person. So really you have really, really bad, and bad can be, it's a bad practice. And it can also be, ooh, it looks like they know it's bad, and they're kind of hiding it. So there's a whole spectrum there. But within the you don't know, can work right on the spot to change it. You can also incorporate, it's not, in this scenario, it's not just we know everything, it's more concept, so working with that utility to make change. Two, for some of them, I think you just have to own it and tell them how to fix it and what are we going to move path forward. Have to provide sufficient documentation. So sure, helpful for the utility and for our office to follow up if it's well documented what the issue is and where we've come to this conclusion. Depending on your particular role in the organization, because some of these now could move into regulatory, or forget that, just that's not good public health, then you may have to turn it over to someone else in the organization. So those are some thoughts on that.
So I think it's good, we probably didn't do this, but I think it's good if at the beginning you think about what sorts of things you might find and decide what kind of things would require an immediate response. I think it's helpful if you can go through that thinking up front. Like for example, if you find data falsification that seems to be deliberate, that might happen. So you should be ready to go, take immediate action. What are you going to do? Another example, if you think there's an immediate public health risk because, let's say, the contact time is being completely bypassed. That's a case where you probably you're going to have to take immediate action.
Yeah, so I'm okay with that. But and we're going to talk about this a little bit later. There's also, though, you don't want to freeze yourself out and trying to anticipate every single thing and then never actually leave the office because you can't come up with a solution to all the things you might find. So there's a little bit of a trade-off. In just our normal jobs, we find things out. And so I guess I would say, well, what would you do if you found out any of these things through some other avenue? And would you necessarily spend time trying to figure out all the things we could find out? So kind of a trade-off. I wonder if we should check some questions. They're starting to pile in faster than I can read.
Okay.
So I'll let you read.
All right, so several people have asked if we have forms that we use to collect data or fact sheets on data integrity. We do have those things, and we can send them to you. We'd be happy to do that.
So maybe by email to us?
Yeah, our contact information is on the last slide. So if you want to send us an email, if you want to receive anything like that, just let us know. Steve's scrolling up to see what else we have on that question.
Question number 5.
Okay, yeah, I think we're caught up.
Great.
Okay.
All right. So, Nancy, how do you present results without discouraging or alarming the utility, your fellow oversight agency, or users on the system?
Yeah, so this makes me think, the first time we presented the turbidity data integrity findings to our staff, we had a visitor, it was at a training event, and we had a visitor from another state agency, and after Steve and I talked, he came up to me and he said, this just confirms it, water utilities should not collect their own data. And that totally blew me away, because that was not what we were trying to say. And so I think it's difficult because we want to create a sense of urgency so people will act, but we don't want to have too much alarm. So every time we present, we try and highlight as many examples as we can of what is working, what utilities are doing well and proactively. So innovations like the pH sampling port that Steve presented in the last webinar, that kind of thing.
I also think it's helpful to couch it in terms of pursuing excellence. We want to get better. We're trying to improve. And within that, I'd probably focus more on not discouraging people, but maybe a little of alarm is okay to kind of move us forward, possible.
Okay, next question. How can we start a data integrity effort given our limited resources, money, time, staff?
So you can't escape that. It is a real constraint. A reminder, we started this whole effort with a question. You know, how good is our data? And in a pretty narrow scope. You've heard Nancy say she believes it's not just Washington only, so hopefully not. So you might be able to move past a pure research to find out. You could maybe morph it into just a verification, or maybe even a friendly competition with Washington as you check in with your utilities. So that, I think it starts small with where you can. Can start with just our own staff. So each time we move out, it may get a little bit more difficult. If we just start here with ourselves, I'm just imagining if you incorporate it into your design review, an actual line item for your reviews for designers or utilities. For instance, A, identify the sample delay in all of your sample lines. That's a single thing to add in there. Or 2, you know, how the heck are you going to affirm contact time 1 year later in this hidden contact basin? So you can just put out the question right here in our own staff how you should do that. Wow, you could even require a water meter, Nancy, where we haven't in the past. So I think some of those are really a way to get going. I want to come back to chatted just a little bit a couple minutes ago, and that's that I do see a big obstacle for lots of new programs. There's a tendency to try to figure out everything for 100% of that world versus let's just try to get what we need to do 80% of it and adapt and change as things unfold. So I think sometimes trying to get it all dialed in perfect actually acts as a pretty significant barrier to move forward.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that idea of starting small and figuring out what the issues are in your state. I found it really useful in the beginning to go through a hands-on workshop. And so that's something you can maybe hold a workshop in your state, either at a treatment plant or at a staff meeting. That sort of thing can be an easy way to get people engaged.
All right, Nancy. So how do you get management and staff support for these programs? Actually, number 5.
Oh, there's a question for number 5.
Yeah.
Or a response here.
So other suggestions on starting the data integrity effort, which is spot on, can you incorporate, or you can incorporate it into the sanitary survey inspections. That's excellent. We actually try to do that. And we do some contract surveyors in addition to staff. And I believe on this year's training, we have included some data integrity around chlorine residual monitoring. So that is absolutely.
Another example where you could do that is you could just take a picture of the turbidity controller screen, and you can see on there often the milliamps versus the NTU reading. And so you can just take that picture back to the office, and you know it's a linear relationship. You can figure out if they're capping. It doesn't have to be in the moment, but you've collected that data.
Yeah. Still on number 5, prioritizing which systems. Excellent. We started with turbidity because Nancy's focus is surface water, so that was an easy one. But we looked at, in this case, rapid rate filtration, which not totally, but 80–90% of it relies on turbidity data to determine whether it's working or not. So we did try to make a smaller world to initiate. Surface waters, we claim they're more susceptible than anything else to microbial, so they always kind of rise to the top up here. Maybe shallow wells could be another one, or just any small subset. It's pretty difficult to think that we know anything outside of Washington.
Yeah, so you need to look at what are the situations in your state, and sometimes a little bit of work up front to figure out what the issues are for your state. I'm thinking data integrity is going to look different in every state.
All right, so back on to number 6, Nancy. How do you get management and staff support?
Well, it turns out we have the manager of the Northwest Drinking Water Office here with us today, Bob James, and we asked him if he'd be willing to give us some thoughts.
Well, I have thought about this a little bit, and I've kind of boiled it down to 3 things. And the first one, I think, is knowledge and understanding. We know how important data collection is and data submittal is to our program. We use it every day. And managers want to learn just as much as staff. And when you get posed questions of where's the data coming from, managers need to have some answers as well. So when staff came to me and said, boy, this is a good project, I said, yes, we need to know data integrity. How good is this information? Where does it come from? So knowledge is important to our program. The next thing I had was motivation. How do you motivate staff? And one of the things that's key for us around here is to look at striving for excellence. And again, that means getting to understand, ask the question why, ask the question how, ask the question when is extremely important. So when staff come forward and say, we need answers, to maintain that level of motivation, that level of excellence, it just pays off great dividends to go out there and get those answers. And then the third bullet, and I don't want to necessarily leave it to 3, but my third bullet is relationship building. Today's operator may be tomorrow's manager, getting them to understand and ask those same questions of why, when, and how. Not because it's the way the previous operator did it, but to really go beyond that, to ask those questions. Lots of times it's really convenient for an operator to ask the question when the equipment manufacturer is on site. But when you're taking over a new position and all the equipment's there and you have this is how we do it, it's real easy to fall into that same pattern of just saying this is the way we've always done it. So let's create those relationships in an equal role. Let's both find out together, how does this equipment work? How should it be working? Is there something we can do better? And improve our relationships with those operators is extremely important to our program. So that's my thinking on why the data integrity is good, and why I can only say I recommend it for other programs.
Thanks, Bob. So I wanted to add to that. I think when you want to get staff support, it really helps to give them hands-on experience. So they can both understand and feel confident when they go out in the field to share that, bring those issues up with their utility partners.
Yeah, and I don't think enough can be said about empowering the individual. Any of this effort can be implemented at an individual level. So even if you were unable to get the entire agency to move as fast as you wanted to, you can implement just in design review or answering questions on the phone. And I think that is a way to engage and energize staff and management. Generally, our colleagues are quite interested in how to improve or up their game. Nancy's scrolling through questions to see if we've missed stuff.
Well, here's one on number 4. The question 4 was, how do you present results without discouraging? And here's a question. If you find problems with wrong reporting, but the utility was unaware, would you issue a notice of violation or simply get them to correct? That is a great question.
Yes. So right from the get-go, our approach is, from that moment moving forward, is the absolute #1 priority. And depending on how bad it is, we might not be able to leave until it gets fixed. So our emphasis has always been on that moment forward, moving through time. If there's things that need to be changed, how short or how tight do you get that? The notice violation has been, from our perspective, a lesser issue, especially because we couch this as a researcher trying to find out.
But it's looking forward. If we, if the utility is reluctant to make the correction, then there've been a few cases where we had to go that route.
Yes.
Or at least threaten that route. But normally, you know, if you take the attitude that they want to provide safe water, which most of them do, you can figure out a way to solve it quickly.
Yeah, so really that is a number 3 in my mind. So some of our comments on number 3, what do you find when you find a bad situation? So a lot of that, in the first round in turbidity, I think we had 4 that required a significant follow-up action by us or by our staff. So excellent question.
So here's another one, and it refers to question 5. Part of starting a data integrity program is training agency staff on all of the instrumentation that you can find at different plants. Was that a significant hurdle for your team? So I'll take that one. Okay. I made Steve take the other one. We have, on the plus side, I guess, when we looked at turbidity, we had one manufacturer that had probably, you know, 90 to 100% of the market. So with turbidimeters anyway, it was more finding out about different models that were out there. I think when you start talking about things like pH meters and that sort of thing, where we have a lot of manufacturers, it maybe gets a little more challenging. But really, I think that you have to be comfortable in kind of discussing the issues in general and not get too hung up on the specifics of that instrumentation. What we found for the turbidity project is it really helped us to find out from the utility what equipment they were using before we went out there, so that we made sure we had the manual and we at least knew where in the manual were the menu structures. But we didn't have to be experts on that equipment.
And I think getting down to, you need to know enough about turbidity. So how is it measured? But just knowing some, I would say, core information is really the questions that you're asking to the utility, and how do they answer, or how do we both answer. So how do you know this data is real, or how do you know that this number we're reading isn't 2 hours old or it's 2 minutes old? So some of them, it can be general, and because it would be very difficult to bring all our staff up and know every conceivable instrument out there.
True. Okay, well, I'm going to move ahead to the next question. Number 7. So what are, let's move this ahead here. No? Okay, we got a little problem with our screen. Hold on. There we go. All right, so number 7, what are the most effective ways to get utilities to change practice?
Ask them to do so. There's nothing like the direct request and then having the reasons for that. You think that creating a climate of excellence is well received. I think you have to walk the talk as an agency and as an individual. Interesting enough, this, I'll say walk the talk, just came up last Friday, the 2nd. It's a real story. So I had a call actually late Thursday. We put off the talk until Friday. A UV system, have several UV reactors. They have insertion mag meters, and not all manner too much detail, but perhaps the UV radiation actually might be impacting accuracy on the meter. So they have some preliminary, hey, the flows might not be exactly right. On our first checkout, maybe we're looking at an 8% error. So the first proposal from the utility was, well, and they get it, everybody gets it. And UV reactors, by the way, have to operate within an operating envelope. So can't exceed a certain flow, can't go underneath flows. And there's power intensity, all driven by flow. So their thought was, well, we'll manually go in there and adjust all the meters to add 8%. So I would have to say that is a typical health department. Yeah, let's just be conservative and slap on an 8% operating correction. But since I knew I'd be talking to you guys today, it seemed difficult to really justify. So we actually came up with a different approach, and that was to pull back the treatment plant's operations from the edges of that operating envelope. So instead of going up to the very large number, just operate below that number by a significant amount until you can resolve just what is the issue or how big is the inaccuracy. So it invokes a different approach than, hey, let's just be conservative. By the way, on that one, if we increase all the flow meters by 8%, it actually ripples through the whole system if you think about it, because then for however long we did that, we've now created 8% more water than actually happened. So that's, I think, a great example of data accuracy. If we can operate within it, is actually better. What else? Education, effective ways to get utilities is set the expectations. I've been struck, I think we've both been struck by how much utilities are interested in what others are doing, and when they find out, oh, well, they do it this way, there seems to be a lot less resistance. And this is for the good operators, or there's always going to be some bad apples. Nancy, what about you?
So I have some thoughts. It seems like if you can make a change to like a monthly operating report, that is a really effective and pretty easy way to get utilities to change their practice. I don't know how many people told me, I went to fill out my report and I realized, oh, I haven't calibrated my meter this quarter yet. And so they do it right then as they're filling out their report. And we also noticed when we were looking at, we had one system that was using UV, and that was a report that we had developed fairly recently, and it had all of the data integrity things in it already. So we had basically no findings because we had already incorporated that into the reporting. The second thing is, if you can, try and make changes in the moment. If it's a setting and you can do it and the utility agrees, that might be like the error mode would be a good example of that. When we first started, we weren't confident enough because we were still learning what the settings meant. But now I just talk to the operator about what it means and ask them if they want to change it right now, and 100% say, well, yeah. And so you can do it right then and it's done. Another thing we've done is on the turbidity settings is to actually send a letter and a form to each system and ask them to record their settings from their turbidimeters. And we give them what we think are the optimal settings, and we ask them to verify that they have set up their turbidimeters the way we think they should. And this also brings some back and forth. If they don't agree with the setting, they give us a call. We have a chance to talk to them about it. So that's been pretty effective too. We've done a lot of speaking at conferences, writing papers and all of that, but I think the direct approach usually works best to get change.
Asking for copies of an SOP also, not for everyone, but can initiate change in some utilities. So that we think that the lack of written standard operating procedures for much of this is a root cause. Bob, the man you just had, or came our guest visitor there, mentioned similar that when operators change out, you have a big problem. So the SOP is asking them, hey, can you give us a copy of this? Can be useful in enacting change in the utility.
Okay, great. Okay, it's freezing up again. just a moment.
Spending too long. I'll let you. So the next one is how do you reconcile differences between pH protocols, EPA method 150.3 and standard methods 4500 H+. So what are we talking about? So now we're going to get a little more like a specific detail issue. You heard us, I think, in the last webinar mention that measuring pH seems the most difficult parameter that we've come across, and kind of a conundrum, if you will, at times. Where, how, what to do it seems to be in dispute by different people. Mentioned that even experts in the field still grabbing a sample and taking it somewhere else hours later and measuring the pH, even though they acknowledge that might not necessarily be the best way or an accurate way to get that. So we thought we'd just throw up some things. These are somewhat a challenge for us. So EPA method 150.3 was produced to deal with this issue. It's awesome. Thank you, EPA. But even with the awesomeness still comes some what do I want? Maybe some tensions between what we have, you hear me frequently say is our Bible standard methods. So for instance, method 150.3 says the equipment must be capable of user calibration, and that's what standard method says, or have documentation of initial calibration from the manufacturer. Second bullet is the calibration frequency for a benchtop unit. Standard methods would say daily. Method 150.3 would allow weekly. And we are pushing this out into the drinking water world, so we're getting some pushback from manufacturers on the online analyzer calibration frequency. So is that really weekly, or so that's one issue. And then another is the buffer solution bracketing, and it's really around if you're going to measure water that's 8.5, that would lead you down a path of calibrating if you're using a 2-buffer system with 7 and 10. And lots of manufacturers, and I'll say people in the field, question the 10. I'm going to dump that on you, Nancy.
Okay, so I'm going to start with equipment. So to me, it's a little problematic that method 150.3 would allow equipment that cannot be calibrated by the user. It seems like, how then do you have, reality? So I'm feeling like the equipment must be capable of user calibration. That's a starting point for me. Yeah. And we actually have a device that we bought. It's like a $70 pocket pH meter, and we were kind of skeptical that it could produce any good readings, but they're using it at the Mount Rainier National Park, where they have, I think, 9 surface water systems. So the other day I decided, well, I'm just going to take a closer look at this thing, and it actually can be calibrated. It can do a 3-point calibration. So I did it. I did a 3-point calibration of that meter and ours, and I compared them, and they actually, it did okay.
Within 0.1, right?
Yeah, it was within 0.1, which is what they said on the in the specifications. So anyway, interesting there. Do you want to have anything else on that one?
Yeah. So we also have some seawater reverse osmosis plants in Washington. That's a bit interesting. So pH alkalinity control after that is a big deal, and these instruments that can't be calibrated. The problem is that if you drop it, you break it, the electrode itself goes bad, you're stuck, and you're then inclined to just keep it. Because you can't verify, check it, so it's just sitting there. So that seems like not a good way to go.
Yes, I think we're agreed on that one. The second one, the calibration frequency, standard method says daily, and the method 150.3 says you can do weekly calibration with a daily single point verification, they call it. So I'm kind of squirming with that. Everything that I have learned from both standard methods and utilities and the manufacturers is telling me that you should be calibrating, bracketing the expected pH of the water every day that you use the instrument. So I've been thinking about this situation we have with a lot of state parks and national parks. They're remote systems. Often the utility doesn't have laboratory facilities available, so they're out there working out of their truck. So I'm thinking that a good approach would be to have them do monitoring weekly for pH and temperature, and I guess temperature doesn't really matter, but for pH do weekly, and then do the chlorine and the temperature every day. So we'd be looking for a lot more robust measurement weekly for the pH, but they just apply that to their CT calculations every day. So that's what I'm throwing out there as an idea to get around this problem.
So it kind of highlights there's in my mind, a little bit of attention on some of these parameters, tension between, is it better to have fewer excellent data points or lots of lower quality data? So that's a tough one. It's hard to argue, well, let's just do it and throw in some bad numbers. So these are, we don't have a great answer yet, I don't think. It's also problematic for me because I've always used these darn terms of the Bible or a holy book, standard methods, and here we are kind of trying to go against it. So I'm biased, I think, in my ability to look at. We're going to talk more about it on this next one, though, on the online analyzer calibration.
Yeah, so we got some feedback from manufacturers that they felt like weekly calibration is excessive. They were willing to go with daily verification, grab sample verification. We're talking about online probes now, but they felt like weekly was completely ridiculous. And I guess I don't know how to react to that because I don't really have data to show that it isn't necessary. And so I think until we get our utilities doing this routinely, we're not going to know. Right. So,
yeah, and I think for lots of the manufacturers, they tell us that they, obviously sell pH monitoring equipment to a wide spectrum, lots of industry, and that much of the industries they sell to, their pH measuring environment is so much more difficult and hostile than our world of drinking water with fairly stable pHs. So that, I think, is biasing them somewhat also. They're used to instruments that can handle significant beating, so to speak, they say, and they just think, boy, this water is like a little, a vacation for their probe. So could be some bias there. Also, though, I'm wondering if you don't have a good sampling site or location for your probe, and it's hard plumbed into a pipe, and you have to shut down your operations to calibrate it, there is a huge barrier to doing it. So some of this could be driven by, you have a good setup for your pH probe that allows you to calibrate.
And if we raise that during the design, which we started to do, I think we can gradually get to the place where it's easy to do the grab sample verification.
So you can't skate on the last one, though, Nancy.
Buffer solution bracketing, 10 is unstable. We keep ours in the refrigerator, and we don't store it in the case of the instrument. But I think some solutions, if you go with my weekly monitoring for the parks and camps, they could use those. You can buy packets now of pH 10 with a single-use thing. Yeah. Nobody would want to use that daily, but if somebody had, they don't have a lab, they don't have the ability to refrigerate that stuff. I don't know. I don't have any other good ideas.
So quite frankly, we were just going to delay this one out until people on the line popped in with the right answers, but all of you are quite silent here on question number 8. So,
Well, you know, one thing is interesting is that the less expensive pH meters, which include all the ones that we own, to do a calibration, they recognize 4, 7, and 10. They don't recognize 8.2 or any other buffer. So your choices are 4, 7, and 10 for our field instruments. I know the more expensive ones, you can tell it whatever you want to tell it.
okay, moving on.
I think there's a few comments or questions on some previous ones here. Well,
We're on top.
oh, I'm at the top. Okay, sorry. All right, I'm going to go ahead and read the next one, and then we'll go back and make sure we get everybody's comments and questions. So, see, how do we enact change across the whole water industry?
No, let's probably bring Bob back in here, huh? I guess we could hold a webinar, or we could try social media, but I digress. I think is not one single answer. I think maybe the most important thing is bringing, oh my gosh, we finally got to why we call it shining the light. Oh, I've forgotten. But to really enact change, you have to be able to talk about an issue. Without being able to talk about it, you can't improve it or get at the underlying problems. So I think by just bringing it out in the open, so to speak, and acknowledging, wow, some of this data isn't actually very good, is a great start.
I think engaging equipment manufacturers is really important. You know, the way that they design their equipment, there's a move towards creating these panels, you know, that you can do pH, chlorine, and temperature all together, but they don't think about how you're going to verify those. There's no sample port in there. There's no place to put your probe. And so I think just bringing that up helps with that. Sometimes we invite our local manufacturers representatives to meet us out at a plant, and we talk about, you know, what's your expectation of this piece of equipment? What kind of maintenance and verification, calibration would you do? And so we can have kind of a three-way learning going on that's been really helpful. We've also invited them to come speak to our staff about new equipment or old equipment, and that's been really helpful as well. I think it's partly about just keep talking about it at every venue that you have a chance to do it. Sometimes I think, you know, everybody must have heard this presentation by now, but we give it again and people say, wow, this was news to me.
I had a comment from somebody attending. At what point can the industry start to take care of itself rather than relying on primacy agencies leading the charge? So I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. I think we're in actually a pretty good position. Not solely, it's not solely the oversight agencies, but we're in a pretty unique position because we are speaking on behalf of public health, in which the whole industry is around, but that's our specific mission. We have had some positive feedback from the journal AWW article. I think, I guess we're just disappointed that it's not being read to, you know, college students or kids at bedtime. So there appears to be a pretty limited venue to actually read the article. So we can't rely on that. It looks like it has to be a multi-pronged.
I've seen great articles by the partnership staff about turbidity, data integrity. I think Steve's right. It's got to be all of us talking about it. And so certainly if you have rural water affiliates, our local one is Evergreen Rural Water. We definitely try and loop them in whenever we're doing training or activities because it's going to take all of us. Even our local Hawk technician that does the service contracts, he called me a few months ago to ask me, how do I check this setting, and how do I make sure we're not capping the data because the operator's asking me about it now?
Yeah. So here's an example of the message taking hold.
Yeah, so this is an example from a new treatment plant. So this plant was not in operation at the time we did our original turbidity data verification project. They read our article, and when they started up, they put laminated cards on every turbidimeter, listing the settings, how they wanted it to be set, how to get there in the menu structure, and then a place to write with a dry erase marker to write the date that they last calibrated, the date they last verified, and when the bulb was replaced. So we did nothing other than write an article. And when we showed up for our first data integrity visit, this is what we found. This is really what we're trying to get to.
Okay, so some more questions. Thank you on the pH questions. So for pH, do you use or require the use of an internal calibration check, an ICC standard? Use that for verification of instrument calibration. We have not finalized what we want to tell everybody to use. So we are looking for this type of input before we write it down. With turbidity, we actually came up with, here are our recommendations. And next statement, I don't see a reason not to take pH daily, but simply downweight your confidence in those measurements in comparison to those after a fresh calibration. The measurements on non-calibration days would be like canaries in a coal mine that would indicate a problem that would justify the labor to calibrate on that day, which was not usually your calibration day. Okay?
Interesting thought.
Yeah. Yeah, and Nancy's floating that idea. It's just an idea that we're popping out. That is not Washington's official position here. So we're trying to figure out and deal with some of these, I'll say, practicalities or pushbacks we get from utilities. So these are excellent.
Yeah, you know, this is always hard. Like we had a utility that was calculating their inactivation ratio at the end of the month, and discovered at the end of the month that there were 2 days when the pH was 8.5, and their normal pH is right around 7, 7.1, 7.2. And so having the pH go up like that for those 2 days meant they had a violation. And we asked, you know, so how do you know those numbers are actually right? This is a water system in a pristine watershed. It's a stream. There's no sources of contamination. It seems amazing that from one day to the next, the turbidity, or sorry, the pH would go up from 7.1 to 8.5. And so we sure wish that the operator had thought about it on the day. Wow, this number doesn't seem quite right. Maybe I should recalibrate my instrument. So anyway, that's kind of where we're still seeing these sort of issues come up. So Steve, you just scrolled through the questions. Do we have any other ones?
I think we're there. Comment. Telling systems or operators why what they're doing is wrong, the reason behind it, concurring that that is very important if you're going to enact change.
All right, so you know what happens every time you go to the questions, then it stops scrolling forward. Okay, we're nearing the end here. So anybody that has any additional questions or feedback, oh, it looks like we're getting a couple here.
Do you think that any of this data integrity information should be included in operator certification courses? Huge modifier, yes, yes. Oh my God.
Yes,
so
what a great idea.
Yeah, this is killing us. So we've had operators totally on board, and they say, why isn't this in classes? And that was really the genesis behind what we are calling lab skills classes. We found an instructor who's excellent, and we're paying for an all-day course on really basic lab skills, but it's data integrity. How do you collect the sample? How do you actually measure the device? The principles behind it, and it's this comment exactly, I think, a huge problem. We've mentioned before. You tell the operators, hey, this is the way, and this is the reason why. We don't get pushback of, oh no, that's ridiculous. We want to be in the dark. So, yeah, and we're having even trouble with, in our system, we're just a reasonably small state, because we don't control necessarily the courses put on. So that's the problem. They have to create that course so that they could then attend that course.
And the other part of that is we're part of the Associated Boards of Certification program, and so there's a national test, and so we think those national exams should include some data integrity questions.
Yeah, imagine if we were trying to move through all 50 states and Canada. If you get those questions on that test, then they would become to the forefront of a lot more people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's excellent.
So Steve, I had a question last week. One of the state parks operators called me and he said, hey, I attended the disinfection webinar. It was great, but you know, you said something that I have some concerns about, and it was about the secondary standard, the spec check that Hawk makes for the pocket colorimeter 2. He said, you guys made it sound like those are no good, we shouldn't use them, but we actually use them at state parks to regularly check our instruments to make sure they're working. And I told him, well, I didn't mean to say that we don't think they're valuable. That's actually the first thing we do when we have a question about an instrument, is check it against the secondary standards. All that we were saying is that it only checks the instrument. It doesn't check if you, the operator, are using it correctly, or if your glassware that you're putting the sample in is in good condition.
Right.
And so to do that, you have to go to the next step.
But I would agree with this operator. It's quite useful. I had an instrument that went, our instrument looked like it went on the fritz to me. And until I actually had figured out how to reset it to the manufacturer's default settings, I couldn't get it to work right. Once you think you fix it, you still need something to give you confidence that, oh, this instrument's reading. So, yeah, we think the secondary standards, if we want to call them, are quite useful for data integrity around these benchtop chlorine test kits.
And we got another question just a few days ago about the new turbidimeters, the TU5 series. Do you remember that one?
Well, we've had a couple, but I'll throw it back at you since
Okay.
you're stringing the question up.
So that one was, what about calibration verification of those new online meters? And the there's some rods that you can use as secondary standard, but they cost like $900 or something like that. And so,
but you get 3 rods.
So the question was, what do we in Washington require for verification? And you might remember we have a weekly verification requirement in our state. Grab sample verification is always acceptable, and we've been able to do a successful verification with the laser turbidimeters and our 2100Q handheld unit. So we feel like you can do it, but some of the operators just aren't really that comfortable with it, and so they prefer the secondary standard, which can be pricey.
Yeah, and I believe they last for a year.
Yeah, so double pricey. So I think, you know, the lesson learned here is that as new equipment comes up, we have to kind of keep on the ball about what the data integrity issues are with that equipment.
So that, I think we're coming to a close. I think I don't see any more questions. I think I have some closing comments, or
I've got one, and that is, you can and should incorporate data integrity into your drinking water program.
and it's pursued a whole mind change. We're trying to get better. There's a model of excellence that we're pursuing, and you can do this. You can start small and implement. So to, I think, come to a close here, a reminder, if you're looking for specific information that we did not cover, or if you want copies of our data sheets from either of these two studies, I think just an email is probably the most efficient way. And if you have more information on pH and all of its intricacies, as we try to move forward with some suggestions to our utility, we sure welcome a continued dialogue. So thank you, and this concludes.